With the stock market crashing and headlines like these almost daily, are you confused as to if this is a good time to buy or sell a house? You're not alone. There are thousands of people just like you asking the same questions, and this is the topic of today's video. Let's dive right into it. Hi, Michael Chu of 7M Realty in Fremont, Silicon Valley. There's a lot of hype in the news, with all the headline evoking negative emotions, and perhaps that's part of our modern life. But let's take a particular look with our three characters going back to 2006. Take Charlie. Charlie was working for a tech company here in Silicon Valley back in 2006 as a director of sales, married with 2 children. Back when the rest of Silicon Valley seemed expensive, Charlie found a house a bit further out and bought the house for $950,000 and some odd change. At the mortgage rate of 6.4%, his monthly payment came out to be $7,533 per month, including tax and insurance, just roughly speaking. What Charlie didn't know was that he bought the house at the worst possible time, when the housing market was sitting on a giant bubble that already started to burst. He was too busy working and making money to pay attention, and since he really needed the house, that was the decision he made to buy the house. And within 30 years fixed mortgage, this amortization table on Zillow shows you kind of a cool chart to see how much money you are paying into your personal and principal and interest on the mortgage. So the green part is the interest portion, and the blue part is the principal portion. Well, 2008 rolled around and the financial crisis hit the country. There were foreclosures, short sales, house price dropped all around the community Charlie was living in, and he was worried. But you know what? He had a job. Life went on, and he just kept paying the mortgage, and before you know it, more than 10 years passed. His home has now appreciated a whole lot more. And based on the home sales in the same neighborhood, it is now over $1.9 million. So, all's well, right? Assuming Charlie sold his house at the end of 2021 due to the need to downsizing, he would have potentially sold his house for that $1.9 million. And at this point, assume he kept his original loan. You know, Charlie turns out to be a very diligent worker. He doesn't have much time to otherwise study or educate on financial matters. And that kind of reminds me of, oh, me. But he did very well for himself. He would have paid off what is left on that loan, which is $687,000 on the loan, and pocketed over $1 million from the equity gain. And if you remember, Charlie bought his house during the worst time, right before the housing market crashed in the U.S. In the San Francisco Bay Area, the average drop in house price was over 40%. And back then, the Stockton, Tracy, and Antioch areas were called the foreclosure capital of the United States. Yet, Charlie stayed on in his house. The crisis didn't affect him, and he is walking away with over $1 million in net worth. So let's look at elsewhere in the U.S., and it was roughly the same story. November of 2006 was the height of the U.S. housing market. The average home was selling for $307,000 and some odd change, inflation adjusted, and we were about to witness the greatest housing crisis in U.S. history. If you'd purchased that month, the worst possible time you could chosen to purchase, your average mortgage rate was 6.4%, so much higher than what we have seen today at 5%-ish. And oh man, would you have been in for a frightening roller coaster of financial stresses at that point. If you lived in that same house for 15 years and sold at the end of 2021, you would have $221,000 remaining on your loan. And that's assuming you purchase with 0% down. While rental prices went up 33% in that time, your 30-year fixed mortgage would have remained the same. In fact, staying in that home until today, your home value would have jumped to $362,000, which is a U.S. average as of the late 2021. And your payment would not have changed at all while rent doubled in that same time. Your home would now be worth an average of $362,000 some odd dollars in November 2021. And assuming you sold at that average price, you could be sitting on roughly over $100,000 in cash, just being, quote unquote, uninformed. But as homeowners, it would work out even if you weren't uninformed anyway. So, among this backdrop, while rental prices went up 33% in that time, our second character, Bonnie, she wasn't so lucky. She stayed a renter and endured the constant rent increase, renting throughout that period. She would have no equity and a rent payment twice the amount of what they were paying in 2006. She would be at the mercy of her landlord's asking price and forced to move whenever the landlord decides not to extend the lease. She has no equity, and yet her monthly payment is just the same or more as a homeowner would. Instead of paying down her own mortgage, she has been helping to pay down her landlord's mortgage. Sad but true. And this part always makes buying a house like an ideal action to take. So lastly, in our story today, there's a Brian, a friend who is a very active investor and wanted to take in a piece of the increase in housing prices in the early 2000s. In hindsight, perhaps Brian got a big case of FOMO, fear of missing out. And as a business owner, Brian wanted to participate in the real estate without spending time managing the property. So he found a local real estate property company that was into flipping houses. Brian started with a few $100,000. Over the course of 3 or 4 years, that investment grew, and his other business was doing well, so he put more money into the same fund. Not only that, he also had other friends and family that he told of the fund, and all told, there were over $1 million put into that fund around 2006-2007 timeframe. And what Brian did not know at that time was the fund manager were taking on riskier projects by that time, and there were loans. They were loaning money to people who can even get a loan through the regular banks or lenders. And the practice was just like the subprime lending. So when the housing bubble started to burst, those projects went belly up one by one. The fund manager stopped returning phone calls, and pretty soon they were nowhere to be found. So Brian, his friends, and family never saw that $1 million coming back, along with quite a few other $1 million of other investors in that fund. So this is a tough story, and I will always tell investors to only invest money you're not depending on for living expenses or retirement. So there you have it. These are just a composite of true stories we and our friends or family experienced through our last downturn, and I thought it's important to share them. As you hear these stories, who do you really most resemble? Is it Charlie, Bonnie, or Brian? Maybe it's somewhere in between. So comment below of your experience and through that period and any lessons you have learned. Let's all share and benefit the viewers so they don't have to repeat the same mistakes. And that's why when people ask, is it still a great time to buy? It is such a hard question to answer without considering your own particular situation. It is a question that requires very individualized analysis and understanding of your goals and or life cycle you're in. Anyone that will freely give you advice without helping to go deeper into your particular situation, be very careful of their motive and knowledge, or maybe lack thereof. I hope this has been helpful to you. And if you have any questions regarding this episode or anything else real estate, reach out to me, email, text, or call. We will be sure to answer your questions so that you can make informed decision without hype. Till next episode, let's make it a great day.